This is Concept E classes, and today we'll deal with Chapter 5 of Class 9 Science, the fundamental unit of life. We'll be covering this chapter in two parts. So in this video, we'll see Part 1. So in this video, first we'll see what are the living organisms made up of. They are made up of cells. Then we'll see what is this cell made up of. So first let's see a basic introduction of cells. What are cells? Cells are the basic structural and functional unit of life. All organisms are made up of cells. Now who discovered the cells? Robert Hooke. He discovered the cells in 1665. While examining a thin slice of cork, Robert Hooke saw that the cork resembled the structure of a honeycomb consisting of many small compartments. Now what is this cork? It is a substance which comes from the bark of a tree. Now he made this observation through a self-designed microscope. See, this is the microscope of Robert Hooke, and he named this small compartments or boxes as cells. Now cell is the Latin word for a little room. So let's study more about cells in the following slides. What are living organisms made up of? All living organisms are made up of cells. So let us understand more about the cells through a simple activity. First, let us take a small piece from an onion bulb. Peel off the skin from the inner layer of the onion with the help of a forceps. Now this layer can be put immediately inside a watch glass containing water. So this will keep the peel from getting folded or getting dry. Okay, now let us take a glass slide and put a drop of water in it and transfer the small piece of peel. Make sure that the peel is perfectly flat on the slide. So what we are going to do is that we are going to observe this peel under a microscope. You all might know what is a microscope, right? It is an instrument which is used to examine very small objects that cannot be seen with a naked eye. It has many parts, like an eyepiece we see through this tube, body tube. Then we have screws for adjustments, and this is where we put the sample in the stage, and we have a microscope slide. So here we take this peel and we make sure that the peel is perfectly flat on the slide. Okay, now we put a drop of saffron solution on the piece followed by a cover slip. We put a cover slip on top of this sample. Okay, now we can observe this slide under a compound microscope. What can be observed? We can see structures like this, right? These structures together form the big structure like an onion bulb. Now if you take onion cells of different size, they all have similar structures under microscope. So this is the structure that we can see under a microscope. So these structures are the basic building units of the onion bulb, and these structures are called as cells. All living organisms are made up of cells. There are also single cells that live on their own, like amoeba, euglena, paramecium. So the invention of magnifying lenses led to the discovery of microscopic world. So let's see some of the discoveries. Cells were first discovered by Robert Hooke in 1665 with the help of primitive microscope. Leeuwenhoek in 1674 discovered the free living cells in pond water with improved microscope. Then Robert Brown in 1831, he discovered the nucleus inside the cell. Purkinje in 1839 coined the term protoplasm for the fluid substance of the cell. The cell theory, it explains that all plants and animals are composed of cells, and all cells is the basic unit of life. These theories were presented by two biologists, Schleiden and Schwann, and this theory was further explained by Virchow, suggesting that the cells, they come from pre-existing cells. Then with the discovery of electron microscope in 1940, it was possible to observe and understand the complex structure of cells and its various organisms. So because of the invention of this magnifying lenses and microscopes, this led to the discovery of the microscopic world. So on the basis of the number of cells, we can classify organisms into unicellular organisms and multicellular organisms. So first let's see about unicellular organisms. Unicellular organisms are made up of only one cell. It is unicell that carries out all the functions needed by the organisms. That is, a single cell may constitute a whole organism, such as amoeba, chlamydomonas, paramecium and bacteria. Whereas multicellular organisms, they are composed of more than one cell. That is, many cells, they group together in a single body and perform different functions. Example, plants, animals and fungi. Now every multicellular organism have come from a single cell. How? Because the cells, they divide to produce cells of their own kind. Thus we can say that all cells come from the pre-existing cells. Now some organisms can also have cells of different kinds. For example, in a human body we have about 200 different types of cells like red blood cells, ovum cells, sperm cells, bone cells, nerve cells, etc. Now the shape and size of the cells are related to the specific function they perform. Okay, for example, the nerve cells, it has branch-like structures. Why is that? It is mainly to interact with an environment. So the shape and size of the cells are mainly related to the specific function of each cell. Now some cells like amoeba, they have changing shapes. Okay, and in some cases the cell shape could be more or less like fixed, like that of a nerve cell. See, if you observe the nerve cells, they always have like this branch-like structure. Okay, so in some cases the cell shape would be more or less like fixed. Now we said that each living cell has the capacity to perform certain basic function. How do they do that? Let's see. We know that there is a division of labor in multicellular organism. Now what do you mean by this division of labor? It means that we are separating the work into a number of tasks. Okay. Say for example, in a human being, there are different parts of the human body to perform different functions, like the heart to pump blood, stomach to digest food. So there's a division of labor in the multicellular organism. Similarly, the division of labor is also seen within a single cell. In fact, each such cell has got certain specific component within it known as the cell organelles. That is, each cell has certain kinds of organelles that perform different types of function, like making a new material or clearing up the waste. Say for example, the lysosomes, they clear up the waste. Mitochondria will help for respiration. Okay, so a cell is able to live and perform all its functions because of these organelles. See for example, in amoeba there are food vacuoles, pseudopodia. Okay, so these organelles together constitute the basic unit called as a cell. And all the cells are found to have the same organelles, no matter what their function is or what organisms they are found in. So we'll study more about these organelles in the following slide. So now let's see what is a cell made up of. So let us understand more about the structural organization of the cell. If we study a cell under a microscope, we could come across three features in almost every cell. Say for animal cell or plant cell, these three features would be common. They are the plasma membrane, the nucleus and the cytoplasm. All activities inside the cell and the interaction of the cell with its environment are possible due to these three features. So let us see how. So first let's see about the plasma membrane. So plasma membrane is the outermost covering of the cell that separates the contents of the cell from its external environment. The plasma membrane, it allows or permits the entry and exit of some materials in and out the cell. Okay, the plasma membrane is also called a cell membrane. It allows the entry and exit of some materials in or sometimes out of the cell as well. It also prevents the movement of some other materials, okay, like certain sugars or amino acids. So we can say that the cell membrane is a selectively permeable membrane because it doesn't allow every molecules to enter in or outside the cell, right? So the cell membrane is called as a selectively permeable membrane. So how does this movement of substance takes place into the cell? We just now said that the plasma membrane allows the entry and exit of the cell, right? So how does this movement takes place? Let's see. Now some substances like carbon dioxide or oxygen, they can move across the cell membrane by the process called as diffusion. Now what is diffusion? We have already studied, right, in class 8. Diffusion is the movement of the substance from an area of high concentration to an area of low concentration. So in cells, the carbon dioxide, which is a cellular waste. Now what is a cellular waste? It's like the byproduct of a cellular respiration, right? So we'll study more about the cellular waste in higher classes. So we can just say that in cells, the carbon dioxide should be excreted, okay? So it accumulates in high concentration inside the cell. See, inside the cell, the concentration of carbon dioxide is more. And in the cell's external environment, the concentration of carbon dioxide is low. So what happens? The carbon dioxide, it moves out of the cell, that is from a region of high concentration to a region of low concentration outside the cell by the process of diffusion. Similarly, oxygen also enters the cell by the process of diffusion when the concentration of the oxygen inside the cell decreases. That is, when the concentration of the oxygen inside the cell is low, the oxygen from outside enters into the cell through the process of diffusion. Hence, we can say that diffusion plays an important role in the gaseous exchange between the cells as well as the cell and its external environment. Now, not only gases, the water also obey this law of diffusion. The movement of water molecules through such a selectively permeable membrane is called as osmosis. Okay, and this movement of water across the plasma membrane is also affected by the amount of substance dissolved in the water. That is, this movement of water, it depends on the concentration of any substance dissolved inside the water. Okay, thus we can say that osmosis is a passage of water from a region of high water concentration through a selectively permeable membrane to a region of low water concentration till the equilibrium is reached. Osmosis is the passage of water or any other solvent from a region of high concentration through a selectively permeable membrane to a region of low concentration till the equilibrium is reached. So if the medium surrounding a cell has higher water concentration than the cell will gain water by osmosis. So such a solution is called as hypertonic solution. That is, let's take the example of the swollen red blood cell. Okay, so here the surrounding area has high water concentration. Okay, so what will happen? The water molecules are free to pass across the cell membrane in both directions, but more water will come into the cell than it leaves. Okay, so what happened? The net overall result is that the water enters the cell and the cell likely swells up. Okay, so such a solution is called as hypertonic solution. Now if the medium has exactly the same water concentration as the cell, there will be no net movement of water across the cell membrane, and that type of solution is called as isotonic solution. See, so here what happens? The water crosses the cell membrane in both directions, but the amount going in is same as the amount going out. So there is no overall movement of water. So the cell will remain the same size. Okay. Now if the medium has a lower water concentration, then the cell will lose water by osmosis, and such a solution is known as hypertonic solution. Okay. So here what happens? The surrounding area has lower water concentration, okay, and the cell has higher concentration. So what will happen? The cell will lose water by osmosis. Again, the water crosses the cell membrane in both directions, but this time more water will leave the cell. Therefore, the cell will shrink. Thus, we can say that osmosis is a special case of diffusion through a selectively permeable membrane. So many unicellular freshwater organisms like euglenophite or diatoms and most plant cells, they tend to gain water through osmosis. They have different types of organelles like contractive vacuole to do this process. Similarly, absorption of water by plant roots, that is also an example of osmosis. Hence we can say that diffusion is important in exchange of both gases and water in the life of a cell. And in addition to this, the cell also obtains nutrition from its environment. Different molecules, they move in and out of the cell through a type of transport requiring use of energy. Now the plasma membrane, other than being selectively permeable, it is also flexible, and it is made up of organic molecules called as lipids and proteins. We can observe the structure of plasma membrane through an electron microscope. See, we can see it like this through an electron microscope. Now the flexibility of cell membrane also enables a cell to engulf in food and other material from its external environment, and such process is called as endocytosis. Okay, so what is endocytosis? It is a cellular process in which the substances are brought into the cell. Okay, and the flexibility of the cell membrane enables the cell to do so. Amoeba, it acquires its food through such process. So you can see here, it engulfs the food. Okay, so this process in which the substances are brought into the cell is called as endocytosis. Now let's see about cell walls. In plant cells, other than the plasma membrane, there is another rigid outer covering called as the cell wall. The cell wall, it lies just outside the plasma membrane. See, if this is the plasma membrane, this yellow color is the cell wall. It lies outside the plasma membrane. Now this plant cell wall is mainly composed of cellulose. The cellulose is a complex substance, and it provides structural strength to the plants. When a living plant cell loses water through osmosis, there is a shrinkage or contraction of the contents of the cell away from the cell wall. See, this phenomenon is called as plasmolysis. Okay, so when a living plant cell, it loses water through osmosis, there is a shrinkage or contraction of the contents of the cell away from the cell wall, and this phenomenon is termed as plasmolysis. So let's see some of the functions of the cell wall. Now the cell wall permits the cells of the plants or fungi and bacteria to withstand very dilute hypertonic external media without bursting. What was the case of hypertonic medium or hypertonic solution? It was a case where the medium surrounding the cell has higher water concentration than the cell, meaning the outside solution is very dilute. So the cell will gain water. So water molecules are free to pass across the cell membrane, but more water will come inside the cell rather than leaving. So what will be the overall result? The cell is likely to swell up and it would burst, but the cell wall will protect the cell from bursting. Okay, so let's see how. In such mediums, the cell tends to take up water. The cell swells up, building up the pressure against the cell wall, but the wall, it exerts an equal pressure against the solid cell. Because of their walls, such cells can withstand much greater changes in the surrounding medium than animal cells. Now let's see about nucleus. So nucleus is the brain of the cell. When we observed the onion cell, we saw there are certain regions that are much darker than other regions. So such dark spherical region is actually the nucleus. Nucleus is a dense and spherical organelle. And the nucleus has a double layered covering called as the nuclear membrane. Okay, and the fluid inside the nucleus surrounded by the nuclear membrane is called as nucleoplasm. Okay, so the nuclear membrane, it has pores which allow the transfer of material from inside the nucleus to its outside. Now the nucleus, it contains certain rod-shaped structures called as chromosomes, and they are seen only when the cell is about to divide. Okay, so these chromosomes actually they contain information for inheritance of characters from parents to the next generation in the form of DNA. You might have seen, right, how a child is similar to that of a parent. That is mainly due to this DNA. So the chromosomes, they are composed of DNA and protein. Now the DNA molecules contain the information which is necessary for constructing and organizing cells. That is, they provide genetic information of various cellular functions, like the functions which is required for growth or which is required for reproduction. So this DNA molecules have all the information for constructing as well as organizing cells. The functional segments of DNA are called as genes. So the nucleus, it contains chromosomes. The chromosomes, it contains DNA and proteins, and the segment of DNA are called as genes. Now in a cell which is not dividing, the DNA is present as a part of a chromatin material. The chromatin material, it is seen as an entangled mass of thread-like structures, okay? And whenever the cell is about to divide, the chromatin material gets organized into chromosomes. Now let's see some of the functions of nucleus. Now the nucleus plays a central role in the cellular reproduction. That is a process by which a single cell divides and forms two cells. Okay, it also plays a very important part along with the environment in determining the way the cell will develop, at what form it will exhibit at maturity, by directing the chemical activities of the cell. So along with cellular reproduction, the nucleus also controls the cell's growth. Now in some organisms like bacteria, the nuclear region of the cell may be poorly defined. That is, we cannot see the boundary due to the absence of a nuclear membrane. Such undefined nuclear region containing only nucleic acids is called as nucleoid. The undefined nuclear region containing only nucleic acid is called as a nucleoid. So this region is a nucleoid region. So those cells which have a nuclear membrane are called as eukaryotic cells, and those organisms are called as eukaryotes. For example, plant cell, animal cell, fungi. So these all have a nuclear membrane, whereas those organisms whose cells lack a nuclear membrane are called as prokaryotes. Pro meaning primary and karyote meaning nucleus. So prokaryotic cells, they not only lack a nuclear membrane, they also lack most of the other cytoplasmic organelles present inside the eukaryotic cells. We'll study more about cytoplasm in the next part. Example of prokaryotes are bacteria, cyanobacteria, archaea, etc. So many of the functions of such cytoplasmic organelles are performed by poorly organized parts of the cytoplasm. For example, the chlorophyll in the photosynthetic prokaryotic bacteria, it is associated with membranous vesicles, bag-like structures, but not with plastids as in eukaryotic cells. So let's see a basic difference between prokaryotic cell and eukaryotic cells. The prokaryotic cells, the size would generally range from 1 to 10 μm, whereas in eukaryotic cells it is from 5 to 100 μm. The nuclear region in prokaryotic cell is poorly defined due to the absence of a nuclear membrane, whereas in eukaryotic cells it is well defined and it's also surrounded by a nuclear membrane. Now in prokaryotic cell they only have a single chromosome, whereas in eukaryotic cells they have more than one chromosome. In prokaryotic cells the membrane bound cell organelles are absent, whereas in eukaryotic cells the membrane bound cell organelles such as mitochondria, lysosome, endoplasmic reticulum, Golgi complex, etc. are all present. So these are the major differences between prokaryotic cells as well as eukaryotic cells. So that's all for part 1. In part 2, we'll see the rest of the topics. We'll see about cytoplasm, many other cell organelles like endoplasmic reticulum, Golgi apparatus, lysosomes, etc. And we'll also deal with cell division. So tune in soon for the next session. Till then, take care, stay safe. May God bless you all. Thank you and bye-bye.